What if Antarctica was habitable? Antarctica today is a desolate wasteland of ice and rock, with barely 4,000 temporary residents and scientists. But it wasn't always this way. As recent as 3 million years ago, the place was a thriving, lush green region filled with forests and vegetation. I know for all the science people out there that a habitable Antarctica would entail much higher sea levels, a higher global temperature, and carbon dioxide levels and such, but I am not focusing on those little minor things for the purpose of this alternate history. I am simply asking, what if the continent of Antarctica, without the ice, was a lush green abode as it was merely 3 million years ago, whose climate resembles that of New Zealand today? First of all, the closest landmass to this continent would be South America, yet I think the first human inhabitants would come from the Pacific. The reason I think this is because the Polynesians were masters of the sea that crossed thousands upon thousands of stretches of open water, while the original South Americans largely stayed close to land. Although it is possible that some South Americans could drift down to Antarctica. Now, considering that the Polynesians only reached New Zealand in around the year 1280, I think it would be beneficial to give them around an extra 100 years to reach Antarctica. It's no easy feat, wandering onto Antarctica. This theory of Polynesians reaching Antarctica is not too far-fetched, since there is some evidence that they may have reached South America before Columbus. If humans were to reach Antarctica, they would basically be presented with splendors that they could not comprehend, a vast land mostly of temperate steppes and some mountains and valleys. Antarctica would likely have some native life, and being isolated so long from the other continents, we could expect to see some pretty wacky mammals. Australia was once the site of giant kangaroos or wombats, and South America once had giant terror birds running around, so expect Antarctica to have much of the same things. Of course, the humans would be able to quickly put out said megafauna due to their weapons and the lack of fear in the animals, as they did in essentially every continent except for Africa. Like New Zealand of today, the colonizers would introduce their own crops, which would likely be the sweet potato and chicken in this case. Now, Europeans had long posited about the existence of a southern continent, although Captain James Cook of Britain had dismantled the theory that such a continent was habitable in the late 1700s. In this alternate timeline, with Antarctica actually being habitable, he would be able to continue well into the Antarctic Circle and eventually reach the continent. Of course, being British, Cook would claim the land for Britain and immediately endeavor to make that fact well known across the world. The British would likely be overwhelmed and overstretched by the sheer size of the continent, and thus would have a hard time enforcing their claims to the land, especially when considering that they would also be developing Australia as a colony around this time. The British would be very few in number, and Spain and France, although weaker from their heyday, would still pose a fighting chance at intruding. Spain, with their empire being relatively close in South America, would make a serious attempt at moving into Antarctica, although they too would be technically overstretched at the time. Weaker and more minor powers, such as Portugal and even the Dutch, after all, Australia and New Zealand were first mapped by the Dutch, might move in until a small hodgepodge of empires make an onto the continent. Picture scramble for Africa 100 years earlier. Like Africa, the region would be split up among the great powers, although the region would be much more sparsely populated than Africa. This is because any native civilization would only be a few hundred years old. The Europeans easily consolidate power against the sparse populations of natives before setting up power structures and sending back boatloads of materials back to their mother countries. The possible resources in Antarctica include silver, copper, gold, nickel, platinum, iron ore, chromium, cobalt, zinc, manganese, lead, titanium, nickel, and uranium. Coal and hydrocarbons have also been located in some minimal quantities. All of these resources are yet to be exploited. However, in an habitable Antarctica, they would readily be exploited. By the 1800s, Antarctica is a thriving place with several nations and a small yet rapidly growing population. In short, it is Australia 2.0. Vast herds of sheep would graze on the steppe, while deposits of minerals are grabbed up by prospectors and draw even more people from all around the world. The population of the world would be even higher today, replenished by a whole nother continent to settle. And that's all, folks. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe. And this is Scholar of the World signing out.